Hello, Gig.
Hey Greg, how's it going with you?
Life is pretty good. How are you?
Good, good. Well, hey, congratulations for your documentary Eddie's Kingdom, which is out today.
Yeah, it is exciting time for us. Yeah, it is out today, so we're pretty happy.
Well, excellent. Well, tell us what sparked you to do this documentary, Eddie's Kingdom.
Yeah, I grew up in Kelowna, which is pretty near to the island, to Rattlesnake Island. And in the 70s, before I was born, my dad had some business dealings with Eddie, just very brief, and realized he was a guy he probably shouldn't be doing business with. And so we kind of grew up with this story of this guy talking to my dad about sending people letter bombs and things like that. And and within Kelowna, there was a lot of kind of urban legends about Eddie. And then when I became a filmmaker, I just figured after doing a few other films, I was like, this story's never been told, and I have some pretty unique access to it. So I figured that it had to be told. And so yeah, Eddie was very open to telling his story, which kind of surprised me. And we went from there.
Tell me about the region itself. Is it just basically sort of like small town countryside region, like everyone's just there's a lot of talk, lots of rumors, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, especially in the area like where I grew up, Kelowna. It's kind of known as Kelowna-fornia, so it's like hot. There's like wine. It's kind of like kind of the newly minted rich are there. But this, you go a tiny bit south from there, and there's a small town called Peachland, and yeah, it is very much everyone knows everybody. And there's a lot of kind of community gossip and things like that. And, amongst the backdrop of this beautiful valley, that people really find are connected to and are there because of the beautiful environment. And so I think one of the things that Eddie kind of didn't understand was the people liked just this kind of unbridled beauty that didn't have a Middle Eastern theme park on the crown jewel of the lake, which was this small island.
So, during the process of your documentary, how did you hunt down Eddie and how did you manage to convince him to participate into your documentary?
That was the easiest part. I mean, so we do a history show called BC Was Awesome, and it's a lot of kind of short, quirky, weird stories from that don't kind of get into the history books. And so one of the stories was about Eddie's Island and kind of the things he did, and we focused on his daughter. And so after doing that, it was a 5 minute piece, and I was like, wait a second, Eddie's still alive? And she's like, oh yeah. And I was like, okay, well, we need to get a feature film, and because we just couldn't interview him in time for the short. And so I contacted him, and he was very excited to tell his story. Like one time I visited him after he agreed to do the film. I visited him in Edmonton, and we walked around this community center just because he showed me his daily life and thinking about what we could film. And he started handing out one sheets of his life, the story of his life, just to random people. So he really wants to get his story out there. And I think part of the reason why it hadn't been told so much is because he's got a very clear idea of what his story is. And so the hard part with working with him was telling him that I'm not going to tell your story, Eddie, or what you think your story is. I'm going to tell what the overall story I think as a filmmaker is. So that was the challenging part. But once he agreed to that, he was still a little frustrated when he saw the end result of the film because it didn't show all just his side. But I think overall he was happy to have the film made about him for sure.
So, talk about the outside research that you went beyond Eddie himself.
Yeah, that was the challenge. That was the bigger challenge than Eddie for sure. We, talked to his kids, which is really important, and a lot of them didn't want to be interviewed. Fadwa did, and that was great. But the other ones who had a much more negative experience with him, it took us a long time to convince just one of them to get on camera. And then also his ex-wife, eventually she just would not go on camera because like Eddie did a lot of horrible things to her, and so she has a lot of trauma. But I felt it was important just to get her voice, and so she agreed to give us just a few quotes that we put text on screen. So that was the only one that it was like I really wanted to get that because that really kind of countered Eddie's perspective. And then the other ones, which actually surprised me, was the hostages. We actually found a couple hostages, and they were still alive, and they still wanted to talk. And so, that was, I was shocked, because like trying to find archive footage of that was so challenging, but actually getting a few people on camera wasn't as. But yeah, it was a considerable amount of research to just to get everything in place, because it wasn't really covered that much in the 70s, which really surprised me. It wasn't like a wild, wild country kind of thing where there's just tons of archives and so much footage, and there was like virtually nothing. So it was a challenge from that perspective.
Well, I mean, the events are important enough that it has its own Wikipedia page, so that's
Yeah.
something. So to you, why was it so important to basically show off the critics of Eddy for your documentary?
Sorry, why was it important to bring them in?
Yeah, bring them in.
Yeah, because I think Eddie's got a really compelling like orator. Like I think he just kind of he presents his perspective very well. Maybe it was a bit more charming before, but there's been a lot of people who haven't heard his detractor side of the story, and I think that it makes it even more interesting. I think because it's like, oh yeah, this guy was wronged by the government. He's a bit of a wild man, but he was wronged by the government. But there's a whole other side of like, well, he did some pretty horrendous things. And I think it, it kind of creates a more full and rich story, but it also does justice to these people whose lives have been like destroyed or ruined or scarred by Eddy. And I didn't want to shy away from that.
Now, you mentioned earlier that there were because of this type of region, people like to talk. What were some of the urban legends that you found that were completely false about Eddy?
That's a really good that's a really good question. I'm trying to think. I mean, there was everything from like, oh yeah, he's totally dead. He lit the island on fire. He went back to Lebanon. He was really good friends with Gaddafi. Gaddafi was going to give him an island in Libya if he gave up this island here. And it's funny, a lot of this urban legend actually came from Eddy. and so some of them, Eddy said so many wild things, and the challenge was to corroborate it and be like, okay, well, is this true? Is this true? And so, there were urban legends, and some of them are, made up for sure, because, Eddy moved away from that area, I think probably 30 years ago now. So he wasn't there to kind of craft the narrative as much. But yeah, there was probably the wildest ones, came from Eddy's mouth. And so that was the challenge, to be like, what's actually true? So yeah.
So was he the type of person, because obviously the film or the government tries to portray him as a insane or crazy, but was he just a person who was just sort of like likes to exaggerate stories and sort of like a big fish syndrome, perhaps?
I think that's a really good framing of it. I think to a certain degree, for sure, he's a big talker. He likes to talk, and he knows how his stories impact you, because it's like he's told me, he's getting a bit older. He's told me the same story of the hostage scenario, not word for word, but kind of sentence for sentence, beat for beat. So he's really good at kind of telling these stories and understands the impact of them. And yeah, I don't think that he was clinically insane. I think looking at the evidence, looking at the court documents from the 70s, it was pretty flimsy what they got him. Well, how they got him into the insane asylum was the government was convicted in a way for that in the next trial in the 80s. But he also did some horrible things, like he was a domestic abuser. He did kidnap his kids. He did hold people at gunpoint, so it's like, it's weird, because talking with him and spending time with him, he seems like he's just kind of like that. Yeah, he likes to tell a story. He likes to have fun. He likes to kind of like, be the center of attention. And so I get pulled in by that, or I think the viewer does too. And then you're like, wait a second, you've done some pretty horrendous things. So even as a filmmaker, he's a really complex character. And the one thing I do think is that he's not insane. He's not schizophrenic. There's all these things that the lawyers or the doctors kind of said he might be this, he might be that. I don't think he's those things. but he in a way he's so fixated on his own perspective, and is that a mental illness? I mean, maybe the end result is he's done some pretty horrendous things, and he can't kind of understand even to this day what his passion and his desire has done to his family, or he can't understand their perspective. So I think he's charming, but he's got an edge, and I think he needs to be confronted with that.
I just found it funny is because he didn't seem to be remorseful of all the actions he has done in the past, and in fact, he seems like he likes to brag about it. Like holding hostages is not a thing to do lightly, especially today.
Yeah, I know, it's shocking. The one thing that I kept on drilling him on, and I never got the answer I wanted, or I never got him to, yeah, like kind of think about it from a different perspective, was the hostage scenario. I was like, okay, so you have these guns in people's faces, and like, do you feel any kind of remorse or kind of anything bad about that? And he was like, no, 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 because they understood that I was in the right and I was fighting against a corrupt government. And I was like, I don't know if they all thought that. If they all thought like, oh, well, this guy, he's okay. He has been wronged in Canada, and he's got a gun in my face, whatever. Like, so I think those are the things that you're just like, Eddie, can you see someone else's perspective? And it's interesting because it's all coming from this idea of justice. Like, he wants justice, and it's true. Like, he has been wronged, and the 70s was a different time, and there were a lot more hijacking and hostages taking, and like it seems a lot more wild now than it did then. I think it was still news for sure, but it happened more. But yeah, he's just unwilling to kind of see it from someone's perspective that that it could be a negative thing to have a gun in your face.
So this island today, is it still owned by the government?
Yeah, so it's owned back, so he owned it for a while, and then he sold it to them when he was in the insane asylum. And so his perspective is like, well, how can I sell anything when I'm quote unquote insane? And so once they got it in the 70s, they turned it into a park. And so it's still a provincial park. And there's a chance that it could be taken out of there and given it to him, but I just cannot see it. I think it's very, very slim. His lawyer said, I think a good quote, he's like, well, just put a plaque on the island and say what happened. Or, like, I think that's really all Eddie would want, is just to have some sort of vindication that he's not crazy Eddie, which everyone called him in the 70s. He's just like a guy who's been screwed over by the government. And he is that guy, but he's also a bit more too.
So when someone drives by, because obviously it's visible from the highway that passes through the area, do they see remnants of his old theme park, or is just all completely restored as what it used to be?
When you're driving by, you can't see it, any remnants. Like, there used to be a pyramid on there that they took down in like the 80s, but we went over there, and yeah, I mean, there's still a few like mini golf holes, and there's still like, there's bits and pieces of things. So if you knew the story, even if you didn't know the story, you'd be like, something was built here, something odd. But no, like, the camel's not there, nothing like kind of weird and wacky. The only thing is the mini golf holes, and like, you can actually go there and play a couple holes, which is cool, and we did with Eddy. So that was a thrill. But there's yeah, it's certainly not what it was in his vision, or at least even how he kind of half built it at its pinnacle. There's none of that left.
I found it ironic that you also presented his castle that he actually built, within visibility distance. Why did you want to include that, and how did in the world that they didn't let him build the island, but to let him build the castle along the area?
Yeah. Oh, I think bringing the castle in was just, again, showing his desire to kind of be different, and also perpetuate a story. Like Omar, the journalist in the documentary, says it really well. He's like, he keeps on crafting his narrative. He keeps on trying to create like this kind of kingdom for himself, of like, he's the center of it. And so, like, he would dress up in the castle, he would dress up, and he would tell the story of his hostage taking, and his his wronged, how he was wronged by the government. And so I think it really, like, exemplified his vision of his world, you know, of kind of his reality. And yeah, I mean, I think the government couldn't say no to it, because in the end it's just a bed and breakfast, you know, and so it was in the right zoning area and it was fine. And like, it's not destroying any of the beauty of nature in their eyes. So it was easy for him to do. And I don't know if it made money, but it certainly wasn't, you know, it went on for a while until, you know, until he kind of lost interest, or Pat, his second wife, couldn't manage it because she was doing all the work and he was just kind of like telling his stories and, you know, selling his books. So
and for you personally, what is your impression of Eddy?
yeah, I know that's the question I get the most, and that's the hardest question. um, you know what, I think he's a little myopic, you know, and a little he's a bit of a, I mean, yeah, he doesn't understand other people's perspective, and he's so driven by justice and love, you know, like he wants to bring people together on this island. And so he's such a conflicting character where, like, I enjoy spending time with him. We play backgammon when the cameras were turned off, but I think he's pretty reprehensible in the things that he's done. And so, you know, like, am I afraid of him? No. Would I be afraid of him when he was 40? Like, maybe, I don't know. So I'm still conflicted to this day about him. But I think his story is worth telling, and I kind of say, you know, in a way, it's a cautionary tale, you know, for both government overreach, but also for obsession. And so I think he's obsessed, and I think that's the thing I take away from it, is like, I just kind of wish he could get over his obsession. So I think that's maybe my final impression of him, is like, you just need to kind of live in our reality, not your reality, because your obsession is kind of destroying you. It's kind of my end result of spending this time with him.
Excellent. Well, let me wrap it up with one more question with you. Is that so? When we actually watch your documentary, Eddy's Kingdom, what's the one most important takeaway that you hope that people would come out of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to that last answer. I mean, I think it's beware of your obsession, or beware of what you find, your perspective and your view of justice. Yeah, you know, I let scratch that. I think it's obsession, just to simplify, because I think that's where it got Eddy in all this hot water. He's so obsessed with his vision of justice, his vision of love and bringing people together, and he just couldn't let go. Like, he's got a family who wants to spend time with him, but he's still out there trying to get his island back, trying to get his daughter, the only one who'll still talk to him, to write letters to a premier who's never going to read it, who's never going to answer him. And he just cannot get out of that. And so I think beware of your obsession is kind of the overall take.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Greg. I really appreciate this. Thank you.
Thanks, Gig. Great to meet you.
You too. Bye.
Hi, thank you.